BCFM 93.2. Bristol is our community.
Well, Mark Carney is about to take over the Bank of England, and the first investigation into his real employer, that is the Bank for International Settlements in Basel in Switzerland. Adam LeBor's book, The Tower of Basel, has just been published, and it makes for frightening reading. The bank provided a lifeline to Hitler in the 1930s, helping fund his arms build-up, and through the war was providing the Nazis with much-needed foreign exchange. Well, I spoke to Adam about the new governor of the Bank of England and his secretive employer earlier this week.
My name is Adam LeBor. I'm an author and a journalist. I've written a book called Tower of Basel, the shadowy history of the secret bank that runs the world, and it's the first investigative history of the Bank for International Settlements. The BIS is a really fascinating institution, and in one line, it's the most important bank in the world that you've almost certainly never heard of. I'm interested in how power is exercised in the world and the role of international institutions. I've previously written a book about the UN and its failure to confront or deal with genocide. The BIS grew out of the same kind of era in a way as the United Nations. The BIS was founded in 1930, ostensibly as a means to manage German reparations payments for the First World War, i.e. the financial penalties imposed on Germany for the First World War. But the real reason the BIS was founded was to have a place where central bankers could meet outside the supervision of politicians and away from nosy journalists. The BIS was founded by an international treaty, which means that it's similar to the United Nations or a foreign embassy. It's technically extraterritorial in Switzerland. The Swiss authorities, although it's based in Basel, the Swiss authorities need the permission of the bank's management to enter the bank, and its assets can never be seized, even during times of war. It can't really be sued under any international Swiss law, and the management enjoy a number of similar privileges to diplomats.
The Swiss authorities, if they need to have permission to actually even enter the premises, then that isn't really a part of Switzerland, Adam.
No, it's not. I mean, and I tried quite hard to find out the exact legal niceties of this, but the bank wasn't particularly helpful. But as far as I could see, I mean, they did send me a copy of the treaty that founded the bank and the 1987 agreement with Switzerland. But as far as I could see from reading it, it means that, yes, technically, it's the same as an embassy. Or the United Nations is legally an international body. But it's also a commercial bank. And it only has 140 customers. Mostly they're other central banks. And it makes the profits tax-free. It was founded in the 1930s at a time when the League of Nations was active, when there was this sort of idealism that nationalism had led the world to the horrors of the First World War. So transnationalism and supranational institutions were really the way forward.
One of the things I found fascinating looking at this bank was that for many years it was very anonymous. After the Second World War, it seems there was a certain amount of embarrassment, and that they were actually, even though they were one of the most powerful banks in the world, based with an anonymous door, but the bank was based over the top of a chocolate shop opposite Basel Station.
I mean, the bank was very anonymous before World War II. The idea, this was a different age when the elites and governments and powerful people weren't really interested in being accountable. There's something of that spirit still continues. I mean, nowadays, every 2 months, the 60 big central bankers of the world meet there. People like Ben Bernanke from the Federal Reserve and Mervyn King and his successor Mark Carney to discuss the global economy. And someone who's been to one of those meetings gave me a great quote. He said the main topic of conversation in those meetings was the stupidity of finance ministers and the quality of the wine. So you can see that very elitist approach continues.
Now, you said that there are 60 central banks that sort of go there and meet, but there are 120 customers. Can you give us an idea of who those customers are?
The bank doesn't say who its customers are. And this is a big contradiction. I mean, we can guess that they're mostly central banks. I think most of the central banks of the world have an account there. Probably some international organizations as well. I would believe that the International Committee of the Red Cross does as well, because I found some documents in the BIS archives showing that they had dealings with the ICRC during the Second World War. And this is the problem, you see, because the BIS says it's an international institution with a mission of public service. Well then, who are your customers? What are you doing for them? But central banks are not commercial organisations. They're managing public reserves. And this is why the secrecy that surrounds the BIS is so problematic. Because when the bankers meet there every 2 months, there's nothing released. There's no press release, there's no agenda, there's no minutes or anything of the discussions. Even though the people that go there are public servants, we're paying their salaries and their plane tickets and their pensions. And yes, we need some more information about what's going on at this bank and what the kind of discussions are taking place there. It's a meeting place for the central bankers. And during the crisis, it's been a very important meeting place. I had an interesting interview with Sir Mervyn King, and he said that, this is a place where they've been able to discuss the different policies and the different mechanisms by which they can deal with the crisis. And so the BIS is more a kind of forum for that, and doesn't have an actual management role. And I give it some credit. During the mid-2000s, the BIS was one of the few organisations who was actually warning and saying, look, guys, there's too much money sloshing around here and it's all going to end rather badly. So their predictions have come true. But I think the point is that we need to know much more about these discussions and who's there and what they're talking about, because these are public servants. And so it's a contradiction to have the confidentiality of a commercial bank but the privileges of an international organisation. I think you're either one or the other. I mean, this is one of the strange things about the BIS, is that it really operates under the radar. Now, we'll give it credit. It has a website, and on the website you can get the annual report, and it does have some information about how it works. But journalists don't seem to have picked up on it, and I think you're completely right, because Mark Carney has been a pivotal figure at the BIS. He's a former member of the board of directors. He's the chairman of the Financial Stability Board. Now, what's the Financial Stability Board, which most people have never heard of? It's actually a very crucial, comparatively new international organisation, and it aims to coordinate regulatory and supervisory bodies for central banks around the world, in other words, to try and avoid the kind of mess that we've got now. And Mr. Carney was also chairman of the Committee on the Global Financial System, another thing which most people have never heard of, which is hosted at the BIS and issues policy recommendations in central banks. So Mr. Carney is clearly a very important person, and his CV in these areas, I think, is actually much more interesting than his record as governor of the Bank of Canada, because this is a good way to go in to say, well, what are these organisations? What's their mandate? How do they work? What kind of thing just there?
Financial stability has not been happening, and the policy reacting to the problems with the financial crisis in 2008, which they've been developing at BIS, which Mark has been developing, neither does that seem to have really been working.
Well, I think you are highlighting an important issue here. I mean, where does the power of central banks come from? Now, obviously, in a democracy, you can't have the government telling the central banks what to do all the time, boost money supply, cut money supply, because they could, for example, engineer a mini boom just before an election by playing around with the money supply, and central banks have to have some degree of independence. But on the other hand, I think we need to know much more about how they're operating. And central banks themselves are more transparent than the BIS. They do, the Bank of England does release some minutes of its discussions, so does the Federal Reserve. But it seems like when they get to the BIS, the door shuts behind them, they've got all these legal immunities around them, and they're suddenly on kind of protected international territory, and we don't know what's going on there, and we should.
What about the assets of the bank? Do we know how wealthy it is?
Yes, it's extremely wealthy. I mean, its profits for last year were more than $1 billion a year, tax-free. Those are distributed, some in dividends, some go back into the bank. So it's regarded as one of the greatest places to do business with. It does provide a service as well. Say, if you're the governor of the Central Bank of Botswana, Estonia, you're unlikely to have the level of skills in asset management and liquidity supply that they can offer you at the BIS. So it provides a service to these banks, and it has a lot of gold. The most recent statistics I had show that it had around 119 tons of gold, which makes it the 30th largest holder, around the 30th largest holder of gold reserves in the world. It's got more gold than Qatar or Canada, and it's a very, very rich institution. And
at what point did money stop serving the populations and the people, and what point did it turn around where people started serving the money system?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think there's any one kind of day when that happened, but I think when we talk about Britain, I think clearly there was a big shift in the Thatcher era and the immediate post-Thatcher era, and it's perhaps related to the Big Bang as well, where, the acquisition of money and the glorification of financial services happened, and, which led in part to the wild housing boom that's going on, and the fact that, it's a good point you raise. I mean, the fact is, if you're a university student now, and say you want to become a teacher, unless your parents, got the bank of mummy and daddy, you're extremely difficult for you to be able to own your own house. And I think a part of that is related to the amount of money, there just seems to be so much more money sloshing around the world.
It was decided at Bretton Woods to close the bank down. Why was that?
Because it was seen as something that was helping the Nazis, as indeed it was. The BIS accepted looted Nazi gold, and the BIS did foreign exchange deals for the Reichsbank, and it was so helpful to the Reichsbank, the Nazi central bank, that Emil Pohl, the vice president of the Reichsbank and a BIS director, said that the BIS was the Reichsbank's only foreign branch. So all of this was being watched in the States, especially by Henry Morgenthau, the Treasury Secretary, and his assistant, Harry Dexter White, and they pushed very hard at Bretton Woods for the bank to be closed down. And although it was agreed that it would be, no date was set, so it never happened.
Well, that's so interesting, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating. Martin, the bank shouldn't exist. It was an attempt to close it down after World War II by the Americans. In fact, they passed a resolution at Bretton Woods saying we've got to get rid of this bank because it was funding Hitler.
Yes, but what happened subsequently is that they thought Stalin was more of a threat, and therefore the ex-Nazi structures, whatever they were integrated into the Western structures. So through Operation Paperclip, lots of ex-Nazis ended up living in Latin America, and that was winked at by the Western intelligence services because the game had moved on, and suddenly we're not fighting the Germans anymore. So the Bank of International Settlements stays as part of our team.
Well, we've heard of the IMF, International Monetary Fund. We've heard of the World Bank. Why haven't we heard of this bank, the BIS, Bank for International Settlements, which is actually far more important as a meeting place and a policy-making place for all the central banks of the world?
I don't think it's clear who actually pulls the strings behind these opaque structures.
Well, Mark Carney, it seems. Mark Carney is actually pulling the strings. He's chairing the Financial Stability Board, which is looking at basically drawing up policy. Another policy-making body, the Committee on the Global Financial System, he's also chairing that.
Well, more importantly, he used to be a Goldman Sachs partner, like all of them. And that's what people have got to recognise, is that we've got the intertwining of private and public interests here. And when our correspondent there was saying, well, you can't have central banks run by governments because governments might want to stoke up mini-booms to get elected and so on, well, that's what used to happen in Britain. Whether it was the Conservative or Labour Party in power, what they tried to do was engineer a mini-boom before elections. It was normal practice. Now, of course, you could argue that that's bad practice, but it was normal practice in the past, where it was the Bank of England was only made independent by Gordon Brown. Before that, it had to obey orders.
Well, these central bankers, one of the things we know they're talking about, we're not allowed to know anything else, but one of the things Adam's found out, Adam LeBor, who was speaking to me from Hungary earlier this week there, the stupidity of the finance ministers and the quality of the wine. Well, hang on a minute, but those finance ministers are there to represent us, not them.
Well, this is the problem all through the whole system, isn't it? Is that there are two constituencies that people in power are dealing with. One is the general population, who they have to keep happy somehow or other, and the other is the people with the money, who are the people who really call the shots. So they're constantly being pulled in two directions.
So are these people, the central bankers meeting at the BIS in secret, are they public servants or not?
Well, they're public servants who also work in the private sector and go back to work in the private sector and so on. So in actual fact, the interests they represent are not those of the community at large. Perhaps we should nationalise the whole lot and make the banking sector run by and for the community.
Anyway, that book is out last week. It's called The Tower of Basel, The Shadowy History of the Secret Bank That Runs the World, the inside story of the central banker's secret bank, by Adam LeBor, L-E-B-O-I, who was speaking to me there early this week from Hungary.
BCFM 93.2. Bristol is our community.
Basel has just been published, and it makes for frightening reading. The bank provided a lifeline to Hitler in the 1930s, helping fund his arms build-up, and through the war was providing the Nazis with much-needed foreign exchange. Well, I spoke to Adam about the new governor of the Bank of England and his secretive employer earlier this week.
And in one line, it's the most important bank in the world that you've almost certainly never heard of. I'm interested in how power is exercised in the world and the role of international institutions. I've previously written a book about the UN and its failure to confront or deal with gender. My name's Adam LeBor. I'm an author and a journalist. I've written a book called Tower of Basel, the shadowy history of the secret bank that runs the world, and it's the first investigative history of the Bank for International Settlements. The BIS is a really fascinating institution aside. The BIS grew out of the same kind of era in a way as the United Nations. The BIS was founded in 1930, ostensibly as a means to manage German reparations payments for the First World War, i.e. the financial penalties imposed on Germany for the First World War.
BCFM 93.2. Bristol is our community.
Well, Mark Carney is about to take over the Bank of England, and the first investigation into his real employer, that is the Bank for International Settlements in Basel in Switzerland. Adam LeBor's book, The Tower of Basel,